This war was inevitable, unfortunately.
There was never a diplomatic solution here, sadly.
Yeah, unfortunately, I have to agree with you because as a diplomat, I hate to say it, but so we need to use this very small window of opportunity of time to end this war. Otherwise, it may become endless.
Hello. Our guest this week on The Edge is Ambassador Volodymyr Yelchenko. And the ambassador lies at the intersection of some of the most important relationships that Ukraine has, whether that is at the United Nations or as the ambassador for Ukraine in the United States of America. Ambassador Yelchenko was a key eyewitness and participant in some of the most important events in the lead up to this war and during the extended period of this conflict. He was even the last Ukrainian ambassador to be posted to Moscow. So, Mr. Ambassador, thank you for coming and spending some time with us here on The Edge. And I want to start with your expertise and your knowledge of diplomacy. What is your kind of take on the repercussions on the diplomatic stage for Russia having launched this war in Ukraine?
Well, it's a difficult question, actually. I think that this war was inevitable, unfortunately. I had my own feelings around the end of 2013, when I was still ambassador in Moscow, when the problems started to arrive with Vilnius summit, non-signing by Yanukovych of EU association agreement. And then Yanukovych, at least 2 or 3 times between the very end of 2013 and early 2014, he was traveling to Moscow and to Sochi to attend the opening and closing ceremonies of the Olympic Games. And I could see in his eyes that he already felt that the problem is coming, the real big problem. So, for me, it meant that he heard something from Putin already, which made him, nervous. But of course, when Maidan started and everything started to fall apart inside Ukraine, Putin just took this chance to start conquering Crimea and then starting the war in Donbass. But still, between 2014 and 2022, I didn't have the feeling that Putin will go as far as to start the real war against Ukraine.
Yeah, or try to forcibly overthrow the government in Kiev.
Yeah. But as I already mentioned to you, my feeling is that Putin just felt at some point of time that he would not be able to persuade President Zelensky after Zelensky's election to go what I call the Belarusian way. So peaceful, taking of Ukraine.
Creation of a puppet government.
Yeah, uniting Ukraine with...
Turn Zelensky into Lukashenko.
Yeah, union state with Belarus, Ukraine, probably Kazakhstan, something like that, or Eurasian Union or Customs Union, stuff like that. And when he realized, first of all, it could not happen during Poroshenko presidency. That was clear, absolutely. But I think Putin just waited, and he had some hopes that Zelensky would become totally different figure. I mean, different from Poroshenko. And he will allow this sort of peaceful, bringing Ukraine back to Russia peacefully.
Or I think also he thought he could manipulate Zelensky
Yes, at least you hope.
And I spoke, and on Zelensky's side of the equation, I had the good fortune to speak with former Ambassador Bill Taylor here in Kiev, and he said in his discussions with Zelensky that despite the fact that Zelensky had been brought in, had been elected on a plan to try and negotiate with Moscow, that according to Ambassador Taylor, so I'm getting this, Zelensky to Taylor to me, is that President Zelensky quickly realized that there was no reciprocal feeling from Moscow that this should be negotiated peacefully, that Putin had aggressive designs on Ukraine, either, as you say, by turning Zelensky into Lukashenko, which I think he quickly learned he couldn't do, or by force. I mean, does that coordinate with what you saw?
Yeah. That's what I mean. And, some people say, not some people, but, serious experts say, or used to say that Putin acted based on the false recommendations from the security service, from the army, from intelligence of Russia, that they would be able to, conquer Ukraine very quickly, Kyiv in 4 days, in 3 days, whatever. And the problem was that I don't know why this information or why the Secret Service of Russia really believed that the situation is like this in Ukraine, because they certainly had a lot of connections, a lot of people in Ukraine and the former opposition in the parliament and stuff like that. But if you just live in Ukraine like me or like you now, and you just talk to people in Kiev, in any small village in Ukraine, very quickly you realize that this is totally different Ukraine from what it used to be 25 years ago or even 10 years ago.
I think they delude themselves willfully. I think they have there's something about them in their sense of empire, and their perspective of Ukraine as a colony, as a part of Mala Russia, little Russia. That there's a mental block where they can't hear the voices of Ukrainians saying, no, we want to be different. We want to be independent.
Yeah, probably you're right. But we're talking about serious expertise.
Oh, I know. But
I mean, the mistakes
I
like
think
that.
The deception goes that deep, that it is so deeply ingrained that even people who are serious people have a fundamental, upon which they build all the rest of it.
Yeah.
So I don't think this was ever going to happen. As much as I'm sure you made all the efforts that you possibly could in the run up to Maidan or in your other diplomatic efforts, because this is one of the reasons why I want to talk to you, is because you're kind of at this nexus point of Russia, U.S. and the UN. You've seen it all.
Yeah.
You've been at all of those areas, and I think there's a misperception that this war could have been avoided diplomatically. And then subsequently, of course, the story, I'm sure, of this narrative that Moscow puts out about Boris Johnson's trip in, I guess it was April or something, of 2022, right after Bucha was discovered. So the idea that Johnson would come with any kind of negotiated deal that would be received welcomely, would be welcomed in Kiev right after Bucha had happened, I think is fantastical. But there was never a diplomatic solution here, sadly.
Yeah, unfortunately, I have to agree with you, because as a diplomat, I hate to say it, but because this, during all my life, all my career as a diplomat, I was trying to come to diplomatic solution in every case. But here you are absolutely right that it was the war was. I will tell you this. Even back, I remember well my last meeting with the embassy staff in Moscow when I was about to be recalled. Or physically, go from Moscow to Kyiv, and since then there was no Ukrainian ambassador. There was Chargé d'Affaires number 2, and now the embassy, just empty. There's no embassy. But that was during the closing ceremony of the Olympic Games in Sochi, Winter Olympic Games, and then a couple of days after that, the situation in Crimea began to deteriorate, and Green Man and Russian soldiers so fast, so on, and during the day when the Russian Parliament took a decision to annex Crimea, I met for the last time with my staff in embassy, and I told them one thing I remember well, that guys, this is only the beginning of the huge problem.
Yeah.
Although I didn't believe that the real war or the full-scale war would start at the end of February 2022, or the big invasion, and I was really surprised that Putin did decide to go as far as just starting to kill Ukrainians.
But back in 2014, I think you're right. I mean, we could see it coming when I was here.
Yeah. It was only the matter of time.
Yeah, it was
sooner or later,
how methodology and things like that. Yeah. During your time in Moscow, you must have gotten to know the Russian diplomatic corps very well, very closely. The Ministerstvo иностранных дел, the foreign ministry. What was your impression of them then? And what do you think of them now? I'm notably, of course, Sergei Lavrov or Peskov. I don't know Peskov. I've had interactions with Lavrov and Zakharova, but not Peskov. And to my mind, they were completely different before the war as to what they are now. I mean, Lavrov to me seems to almost be a shadow of his former self. Zakharova, we've seen in press conference, notably the borscht press conference where she gave her mother's borscht recipe, and politely it seemed to be she was a little bit impaired.
Потому что нельзя было делиться борщом. Ну нельзя, он должен был принадлежать только кому-то одному. Вот только кому-то.
What was your impression of them then? And what's your impression of them now that you're looking, obviously now from afar, but how's this war affected them?
I would agree that it looks like we're dealing with totally different people or persons.
Yeah.
And I just cannot get it. I mean, I don't understand why. Because I used to know, and I've spent a lot of years working, well, not together, but in the same, delegations, UN Security Council, Russian embassies, foreign ministry in Moscow, New York, Washington, and I couldn't imagine that people may change so quickly and so dramatically, especially when you are talking about a person of like 55, 60, 65 years old. Mm-hmm. You can change the mentality of the younger person, but you cannot really change so quickly the mind of a person who is 60 years old with all his, diplomatic.
And he was one of the greats. He was. Yeah. I have two Sergei Lavrov stories that I tell. And it exemplifies to me what he was at one point. He was probably one of the world's best diplomats. He outmaneuvered. There was nobody on the Western side of the equation in the diplomatic corps that he ran circles around Kerry. He ran circles around, the French, the Brits. I was in Geneva for the so-called Iran nuke talks, the build-up over a year, basically, so a series of talks. And Lavrov, the two stories I tell, one is from a colleague of mine who was rushing to get to an appointment, and he came off the lift, he came out of the elevator, and he was rushing, and he ran out of the elevator, not realizing that the Russian delegation was about to get into the lift, and he stepped on Sergei Lavrov's foot. And I'm so sorry. And he describes it as an icy stare of death. He said, Lavrov looked at him and he said, "I'm so sorry, Mr. Lavrov. I'm so sorry." He said, "Yes, you are." And then got into the lift. I mean, that's Sergei Lavrov. That's this kind of sharp, kind of And then the other story I tell from this same period of time, this year of interaction in Geneva, was one time we were all sat, the press corps was waiting for the departure of the delegation, the various delegations after a day of talks. And we're sitting there. And then suddenly the entire Western delegations, all the diplomatic group teams from the Western nations came racing out of the conference room at the Intercontinental Hotel, got in their town cars or their taxi limousines or whatever, their security cars, and raced away. Something obviously had happened. Lavrov, with Maria Zakharova in tow, come out calmly as could be, just cool as cool can be, walked into the hotel bar, which had been closed, instructed the hotel staff to reopen the bar, and he sat there having a double scotch with Maria, just like the cat who'd had the cream, This was the kind of Sergei Lavrov that I knew, that I witnessed firsthand. And I now see him pushed to the side. I see him relegated to a very secondary role within Russia. He was once, very close to Vladimir Putin. He does not seem to be anywhere near as close as he used to be. Again, we're seeing this disintegration of the Russian diplomatic corps. It says to me that there's a lot of pressure on them.
Yes.
And
the Russian foreign ministry, well, you're right. I remember the times when any major international issue was taken care by Russian foreign minister first, and then, well, of course, like in any other country, you should have a confirmation of your position from the very upper level, from the presidential administration of Russia or prime minister, whatever. But still, Russian foreign minister at some point of time in the 90s, at the beginning of let's say before 2010 approximately, they used to have what we call a free hand. So they had some liberty in elaborating the position.
So Putin would
of
give
Russia.
them a long leash.
Yeah. But it all stopped sometime after 2010. They, like you said, they turned into sort of second-hand, diplomatic service. They don't have a liberty to work out the positions of Russia on any international issue. The example I will give you, when I was ambassador to the United Nations for the second time between 2015 to 2019. At that time, at least for 2 years, we were sitting together with Russian Federation in the UN Security Council. And when you sit, especially when you have this, what they call closed consultations, very narrow circle of like ambassador plus one, 15 people in the very small room, and you can see some documents, you can see or you can hear what they talk to each other. And I suddenly realized that they just read out everything received from Moscow, which was not the case before. Before, Lavrov, as you said, he used to be a very good speaker. He spoke 2, 3, 4 languages. He could deliver the statement just without any preparation, just from his head. But now, when you look at the Russian ambassador at the United Nations Security Council, he is just, reading the text. He's not even, he doesn't look up. He's afraid to skip, any, comma or letter or word from the text which was written in the Kremlin, not even in the foreign ministry of Russia.
Yeah, so, written in the Kremlin, sent over to the ministry down there on the circle.
That's why you notice that probably the Russian diplomats, they don't have any influence whatsoever on the things which
I
happen.
wanted to ask you about that because I wanted to ask you how, and maybe they don't have the autonomy that they used to have, but the product is still the same in many ways. When you were at the UN, explain to us, how is it that the Russians act as kind of spoilers at the UN? They have a reputation at the UN, it's my understanding, of being very divisive.
Yeah.
At the General Assembly, but then at the Security Council. Can you tell, how do they kind of manipulate the United Nations?
They just say things with the open eyes, things which you first don't even understand or realize that, total bullshit. Sorry for this word.
No, it's appropriate.
But they say it again and again, and then it looks like they themselves start to believe in what they say, because I don't think that Nebenza, the current Russian ambassador to the UN and to the Security Council, when he says about those military mosquitoes which are growing up in Ukraine
with the genetics, the poison,
So the white is black, the black is white, it's Orwell style. But and then you realize that they are starting to believe themselves in what they say.
Yes,
and people around the Security Council table, they just laugh at them. But it doesn't change anything.
No.
They just continue saying stupid things. And not only about Ukraine.
No, about everything.
About everything.
Yes.
They
lie. They lie consistently.
You're totally right saying that they're very divisive in the UN. They're just probably copying the behavior of the former Soviet Union or former Soviet Union diplomacy, which used to do the same.
Yes.
To call black white and white black and stuff like that.
With not the intention of proving their point, but rather with the intention of destabilizing the rules-based order.
Yes, and they are clever enough. Russian delegation in the UN is famous for their knowledge of the rules of procedure, technical details, small things.
This is the thing. You're right.
Nobody else.
Yeah. Here's what
nor
I've
Americans, nor the Brits. They cannot.
It doesn't matter. It doesn't. They will say whatever they want to, and they know you're right. They know the rules back and forth. But what I find very interesting when it comes to how they interact on the global stage, when they scream about the rules and the laws and international laws and who's in violation of what international law, when at home domestically they don't believe in law. That there is no law in Russia. There is power in Russia. So they don't believe in this idea, and they're being disingenuous. It is my opinion. They are being disingenuous on the global stage by using rules and law, not because they genuinely believe in it, but they know that it is a mechanism to sow disorder globally and for them to exert their influence. I wonder if that gels with what you saw.
Yes, absolutely. I think the same.
They don't care about the laws. They care about using the laws
and,
to mess with everybody.
This knowledge
and get their way.
This best knowledge and good expertise helps them a lot to manipulate.
It's so cynical. It's so cynical.
And the second thing, what they do, they are very clever in using their puppets in the United Nations, like Cubans, Syrians, Iranians, Venezuelans. Some, small, Belarus, of course, and some other, at some point, Armenia, for example, or even Kazakhstan.
They're proxies.
Proxies. But
they're client states.
Some of them are closer to them. Some are not as close as the others. But still, they have this group of approximately 10 to 12 countries, the bad guys. We used to call them, in the UN, everything. When you have this stupid consensus rule in the General Assembly, for example, you may need only 2 or 3 countries which will spoil everything. They will come against 185, and they will spoil and kill any decision. And of course, in the Security Council, Russians, they are just using their right of veto. to kill anything which is going against their own interests.
But what I think they underestimated when it came to this war and to initiating this imperialist land grab, you could say what you want about Western powers and their exertion of their imperial power, but nobody's been tried to annex a neighbor in quite some time. That's what the whole post World War II world was all about. They've tried to grab by force of arms a neighbor's territory, and so I don't think they expected the reaction from the international community because they're all about being divisive. They want to divide and conquer. And what they have done by invading Ukraine is they've unified the West in a way that I have not seen in my lifetime, really. I mean, the European Union was always kind of fractured. It was always a very loose union of people, everybody pursuing their own little national interests. But they have unified. But NATO, after being very hammered at for quite some time, has come back together under the leadership of President Biden, and NATO is now got new members and is more unified than it has ever been. Do you think that the war took them by surprise and did the exact opposite of what they had hoped to do, which was to sow division, and instead they now are facing a very unified world that is standing against them? I mean, they have very few friends now.
Yes, well, I think that, or I would say it this way, I think that the decision to go for war against Ukraine was Putin's biggest mistake, because of course he
in his entire presidency.
Yeah, he couldn't even imagine that the war would take so much time, effort, and killings. He hoped to take Ukraine, if not in 2-3 days, but probably in 6 months.
And then it would be a done deal.
And
it would like in Georgia in 2008. Once it was done, it was already.
Or like with Crimea.
Yes.
I mean,
once it's accomplished,
you can.
People aren't going to fight for it. But if it's
you
still
may
a question,
like it or not. But Crimea question. It was not totally forgotten after like 10 years of occupation by Russia. But it was, coming to the 2nd, 3rd, 7th, 12th place in people's priorities, and inevitably, at some point of time, I wouldn't say that Crimea would be totally forgotten, but it would become like Cyprus issue or Middle East issue, 70
something's
years
always
of conflict,
in the background,
or even like
the Irish issue, the troubles,
or
it's always in the background,
or the story about non-recognition by the United States of the Baltic states, occupied by the Soviet Union.
Yes,
it took 52 or 58 years until the Soviet Union collapsed and the Baltics became independent again. So something like that would have happened to Crimea. But when the big war started in Ukraine, or the big aggression started, then of course you're right. The West realized that something very dangerous was coming, something real.
Yeah, I think he overplayed his hand.
Yeah. They overplayed and they made this mistake. Now, as we speak, the Russian losses in Ukraine come closer to 500,000.
Yeah,
it's like 497.
Yeah, it'll soon be 500,000.
Only 500,000 killed or wounded, whatever. This is huge. I mean, this figure is huge, but. And I don't really think what else Putin can use in order to return the situation in his favor. I don't see anything, with the exception of using nuclear weapons, of course. But that would mean the end of the world.
Yeah, and even if it was a limited exchange, it would be the end of Vladimir Putin because
So this is not the option.
Even the Chinese, they would turn against him and all the rest of it.
This is not the option.
Let me ask you a question about your time as ambassador to the United States in Washington, D.C. When you were there, what was the most difficult thing that you had to explain to your counterparts at the State Department about the conflict here in Ukraine? What when you went and sat down with somebody from state or maybe the Pentagon or the White House, what was the most difficult thing for you to explain to an American delegation about what was happening here and who and what Ukraine is and why they're fighting?
You may be surprised by my answer, but it was already about weapons. That was before the big invasion, but that was the time when I myself negotiated the delivery of the very first, battleships to Ukraine from Baltimore, like island type, they say, like patrol
frigates. They were patrol boats, coastal guard,
something
kind of thing. Protect Ukraine's waters, territorial waters,
and it worked. It has become a very relevant issue, especially after this tragic accident or incident in the Kerch Strait when 2 Ukrainian ships were taken by Russians, and some people were killed and taken hostages.
Yes, I
And
remember.
at that time, Americans realized that they need to give something to Ukraine in order to strengthen at least this, border control part of. But of course, it was before the big invasion. And then at that time, I started talking. Of course, upon instruction from the Minister of Defense of Ukraine and the presidential administration about Patriots.
Mm-hmm.
Even then, some people in Ukraine started to think about the need to strengthen the air defense as well. Of course, nobody expected such an invasion at that time, because that was like 2 years before.
But it was all you were having conversations with your counterparts in the United States about weaponry, about defense.
That was both with Pentagon and with State Department.
Did you ever get a pushback from state, in particular, or maybe the president's office, of, can you not find a way to, live with Russia? Did they ever try and influence you?
Not really.
No.
Not really.
So they understood. They understood that Russia was a serious threat, and wasn't going to be resolved with a talk.
But they were sort of, in my opinion, too slow in coming to this realization.
For fear of Russia, or not an understanding of Ukraine's needs?
Maybe for fear of Russia, maybe because of this, traditional school of thought. I used to call it the old guard. People in the State Department and in the White House, and not in Pentagon, and in some think tanks, especially in Washington D.C. Old school, like Fiona Hill, for example. People who used to study in Russia, who used to work in the American embassy for years, ambassadors, younger diplomats.
Yep.
So they still had this, knowledge of the former Soviet Union.
Is it romanticized?
They
kind of idyllic
perestroika and razryadka and stuff like that.
That period, that very thin window of time where there was a hope that maybe Russia and the Western world could find some sort of and if not friendship, then association.
Yeah, and also many of them.
Well, that lasted about that long.
Many of the same people still have this belief that they could still bring back Russia at least to the situation of the 90s, like Yeltsin presidency, a lot of hopes for democracy, and things like that. And I was trying to tell them that, look, we are living close to Russia for like 70 years. I myself spent, the first half of my career as a Soviet citizen, and I know them better than you. Don't tell me that you can still, talk them into something.
Yeah,
they are not.
I could name names, but
they are not people you think of.
Yes, you're romantic. You're thinking about your 20s, your 30s, whatever it was when you were visiting and traveling and living in this very different Russia, this very from its entire history, there was this period of the post-Soviet. And I suspect, although none of us are old enough, to remember, and because it's past our living lifetime, but I'm sure there was a window of opportunity in the post-Tsarist empire, where before the Bolsheviks, there are these little isolated incidents in Russia where they might have had a chance to make some fundamental changes and be, a functioning partner on the global stage.
Yes,
but
you're right.
They always revert back to.
You're right. It happened in between 1970. 1915, 1920. Then the very short
when there
period.
was an actual Duma with some power.
Then again,
they reverted. They
always
revert.
The very early weeks and months after the victory in the Second World War, there was also kind of before the Cold War started.
Moment in time. Yes.
Then, of course, the beginning of the 90s.
I remember that's when I was living in Moscow.
Yelchin,
yep.
But, they...
So you ran into these people who kind of had this perception of Russia as a potential, normal, quote unquote, whatever that means, country.
More than that.
It wasn't realistic. It was based on this kind of flowery idea of when they lived in
more than
Russia.
that. At least some of those people are still there.
Yes, I know.
They're still around. That's why you hear recently this, kind of relatively new topic or fresh topic about the non-use of U.S. weapons against Russian territory.
Mm-hmm.
And I can imagine some of those people I talked to who would come to President Biden and say, no, we cannot do we cannot allow Ukrainian to use because this is the end of the world. This is the beginning of the nuclear war. This is the red line, whatever. Although I don't think that there are any red lines left. The only one is
I would tend to agree.
Probably nuclear weapons, yes, but
again, if they use nukes,
as we discussed
we're
earlier,
in a completely different world. Conversely, as you were ambassador to the United States, what do you now, coming back to Ukraine, have difficulty explaining to your Ukrainian colleagues and friends and people in the diplomatic corps here in Ukraine or just average Ukrainian citizens? Because I hear very often frustration and confusion and anxiety expressed from the Ukrainian people when they look at America and America's support for them and how kind of you almost have to drag help out of the Americans when on the other side of the equation. So you've explained to me what you as the ambassador to America for Ukraine were having to explain to your American counterparts. What is it coming back to Ukraine and going, no, this is what you have to understand about America? What are you saying to your fellow Ukrainians?
This is a relatively easy question because I used to answer it quite often. My personal strong belief, based on my more than 40 years of diplomatic experience, and half of it I spent in the United States in one capacity
either
or
at
another.
the UN in New York or
and
DC,
I think I know Americans well. I understand them well.
All right. Give it to me.
And I used to say all the time, once and again, that there's no better friend of Ukraine than the United States. By the way, this is not my phrase. This is a phrase belonged to Nikki Haley. I've heard this phrase from her during one of the meetings in the Security Council. About Ukraine, of course, and it came so deeply in my mind. I'm still repeating this phrase because I believe in that. But unfortunately, when you say it to some Ukrainians, they would say, no. They give us not enough weapons. They are letting us down here and there. I say, look, you have to be frank with them. I mean, if you want to be liked by Americans, you have to show that you are the real friend, because Americans need you also from time to time. Mm-hmm. UN voting, some issues. Yes, and this is the second thing which I'm saying all the time, because I hear from time to time here, even during the war, that look, why Americans are not investing money in Ukraine. not enough. I say, but look, guys, you have to sort out those issues because the U.S. investors don't trust in Ukraine.
Yeah.
Because we have these issues.
Well, the corruption issues.
Corruption issues.
No, absolutely.
Yeah.
Which will never change as long as Moscow is running things here, which is kind of part of what this war is about.
Only then you would become the real friend of the United States.
And I think that I do, if I can just provide some of my perspective, having come here for 25 years, I think that will happen. I think that when the war is over, there is going to be a very strong emphasis on anti-corruption efforts. They're already happening now, but it's going to increase because Ukraine will be looking for joining the international community, both the Europeans, but also the West and America. I know that they want to have good relations. That's why right behind you there, I have the statue for the motherland next to the beacon from the Statue of Liberty. So that's on purpose.
Coming back to the issue of corruption, which I hate.
Oh, me too.
Totally.
I know.
But
it is a reality, however.
Yeah, but when I talk to some Ukrainians and they say, look, why Americans criticize us so much about corruption? They have corruption in the United States as well. So why should they tell us? I said, look, guys, these are absolutely different. It's not the same. It's not the same.
Not the same at all. Corruption here, sadly, as a result, I would argue, although I don't take away the responsibility for Ukrainians as well for this, but I do see the influence of Russia's way of life. Yeah. And its kleptocracy. Yes. That is not just Putin's kleptocracy. This is Russia's history is corruption, and much of the influence of Moscow here in Ukraine has led to that corruption. Not to absolve of Ukraine.
It's like cancer.
It is. It's like a cancer, and it's also like the water in which you swim. Yeah. It's everywhere. And hopefully we can. I am confident that change will be made. Because not least, aside from the fact that Ukraine wants to be a partner and wants to be allied, I'm very pro-American general sentiment that I feel here, despite all the criticism and the anxiety and the frustration with us. I genuinely do think that most Ukrainians do look upon America favorably. So let's hope that we can improve, but certainly, obviously, we have to get to a victory in the war first. Now, in conclusion, Mr. Ambassador, and I have said previously about this podcast that I don't intend to make this podcast about kind of the news of the day. But it is a historical record, so I want to take this moment in time. We are filming about a month before a planned, what is being called a peace meeting or a diplomatic meeting, perhaps, at Lake Lucerne in Switzerland. Approximately 50 nations will be attending. President Zelensky will be there. The Russians will not be at time of recording. The Russians are not invited, but the organizers have said that's because Russia's not interested. They're not being, they haven't shown no inclination to coming to the table. So it seems to me, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, that this seems to be the West gathering to talk about possible presenting a unified front on the diplomatic stage to Russia when the military situation, when we start to move towards diplomacy, as all wars will end with diplomacy, that they can then have a unified front when they go to Moscow, when honest and sincere peace negotiations begin. That's my take on it, but I would be interested in your input with your years of expertise. What can we realistically expect to come out of the Lucerne meeting?
I think that one should not expect any immediate solution. This is actually, if you look back into history and you have those Middle East peace conferences, Bosnia peace conference,
Dayton, ultimately led to Dayton,
some other things, Avram records. On Israel and other stuff. When you look at all this, you realize that any big international event has to have some stages. Mm-hmm. So the Swiss conference or the Swiss summit is only the not very first, but one of the very first, stages in this long process of coming to peace or ending the war, at least initially. Why? Because we need to have more and more countries from the global south on board. We cannot live endlessly with only NATO, EU plus platform. By plus, I mean countries like Japan, Australia, South Korea, whatever, some Latin American countries. We need to have some big guys there, like China, like India, Brazil, South Africa, Egypt, Mozambique, Angola, Indonesia.
The BRICS nations, which are ostensibly not allied, but
which is not happening as
Russia.
quickly as we want. Some of those countries are still on the Russian side. Some are, I call it like positively neutral. They are.
Would India be on that?
Yeah, they would agree that Russia is not right invading Ukraine, but still.
But still, it's a large country with we can't ignore it and we can't isolate it.
The good indication is that Prime Minister Modi of India is planning to come to this summit. Probably his decision will push some others to go, because India sort of is trying to counterbalance everything with China. They're not enemies, but they're not friends, of course. And if Modi goes there, then Mr. C will start thinking of, look, this is not good if Modi goes and I don't, or at least my foreign minister doesn't go there. So we'll see.
But if we get these either BRICS or the other countries that you referenced there on board in Lucerne to come to some sort of agreement or a statement that they then can be presented to Vladimir Putin.
Yes, and here
is
comes
that the best we can hope from Lucerne?
Right. Here comes my second thought, that I think that those who are working out the outcome of this Lucerne conference, they made a very clever decision. They picked up not all 10 or more points of the so-called Ukrainian peace plan, because some of them are very much political, some of them about compensation by Russia to Ukraine after the war, about the punishment of the war criminals, things
the return of the children, the reimbursement for the damages.
Yeah. So what they decided to pick up and to focus on during the conference are only 3, 4, 5 points. Nuclear security, freedom of navigation in the Black Sea and globally. Humanitarian issues, among those are children return and the swap of prisoners of war, all for all, and food security. So these are the issues which are very attractive to the global south.
What about borders, though? I mean, at one point, do we talk about borders? We're nowhere near that.
I don't think. Well, I don't know. I'm not part of preparations. Well, certainly, we can find out that when the conference starts. Inevitably, in the statements. Many countries will talk about borders and sovereignty and integrity of Ukraine and other things, but the points I mentioned are something easier to get agreement on
than the actual.
Yeah.
Well,
because
sadly,
as you said rightly, we need, the participants of the conference, need to create some platform with which they can come to Putin and say, look, Putin, here we come, and here are the points, and you need to agree with those. Otherwise, you will get more sanctions, you will get this and that.
And the international community will stand against you. And so sadly, I guess what that means is that there's still more fighting that will need to be done, and actual, possession of territory is going to be, that will have to be reflected at another time. You can address the issues that you brought up, but when it comes to who holds what territory, it's still going to have to be done with armed confrontation.
Probably,
sadly,
those issues will come as a second stage. during
Yeah.
the second
Boy, that breaks my
conference or
heart.
whatever.
That's unfortunate. And I guess lastly, to draw a conclusion to our lovely conversation, and thank you for coming, is reflecting on diplomacy in the lead up and in the conduct of both the post 2000, the 2014-2022 period, when the war was kind of isolated, and Crimea and Donbass. But as you reflect on where diplomacy started, when it comes to an almost inevitable conflict between these two nations, and then you go into how things have progressed during the actual armed conflict, and then forecasting further, because all wars do end with diplomacy. That arc, when you reflect on how diplomacy has either worked or not worked, what is your reflection on that?
I think, allow me just to pick up one thing on both sides.
On either extreme.
One positive and one negative.
Sure.
The positive is certainly that we were able to create this sort of coalition of support of Ukraine. And it comes to weapons, it comes to weaponry, financial aid, humanitarian assistance, and many, many other things. So we have this very strong core coalition, mostly European and Western nations, of course, but Japan also, and some others, South Korea, which certainly saved Ukraine. Otherwise, I don't think we would be able to survive for more than 2 years already. The negative thing is that we were not able to make this coalition universal. It still does not have countries like India, China, or Indonesia, or Vietnam, whatever, Arab countries. Yes, there are some who are more helpful, like Saudi Arabia, for example, or Modi from India is coming to the Swiss conference, which is a good indication of the change. But still, it's not universal.
Yeah.
And when you take any UN General Assembly decision on Ukraine taken recently, although some of them had 143, 145 votes in favor, but there are 193 UN members. And among those 143, there's no India, no China, no South Africa. They are not voting against, but...
is it because of their association with Moscow, or is it because Ukraine and the West has not properly made those countries aware that it would be better for them to stand?
I think that was
with
probably
the rest of the world.
Both. I think we probably needed to be more forthcoming with them, and our partners, our allies, especially those who have much more influence on those countries, like United Kingdom, for example, in Africa, or France, Francophone Africa, or Spain in Latin America. Probably they would need to be more active and persuading those countries who are not willing to, even if they're not on the Russian side, but they're not very much willing, to be in the middle of these, big guys are fighting, like Russia is fighting against NATO or US, Russia, and they just don't want to be part of it. They don't want to take sides, clearly.
Right.
But I think it's the matter of talking, of arguments, of knowledge, and there is still a lot of work ahead. And I mean, both Ukrainian diplomats and politicians and members of the parliament and their colleagues from the West.
Are you have any cause for optimism for a diplomatic resolution, which ultimately will have to happen. But
Yes, I think we still have chances to end this war sooner than later. At the same time, my only fear is that if you take any major conflict in the world during the last 80 years, after the Second World War, you will see that all of them, or almost all of them, are becoming so-called frozen. And if you are not able to unfreeze them or end them in 5 to 7, maximum 10 years, they're becoming endless.
yeah,
Middle East, issue of Palestine, Northern Cyprus, Transnistria. The only exception is surprisingly Nagorno-Karabakh. But why? Because Azerbaijan just took it back militarily.
Yeah.
And not diplomatically.
So sadly, there has to be a military victory, which will mean lots more death and destruction no matter what happens.
Yeah.
Or a real emphasis on a diplomatic, solution that will need the involvement of the entire globe.
Yeah.
Or potentially we fall into a forever war.
Yes, because we are coming closer and closer to this, time limit. 7, 8, 10 years.
Yeah.
Because when you talk about a war in Ukraine or Russian aggression against Ukraine, you should start counting from 2014. So it's already 10 years.
Yeah.
And this is it. This is the period of time when things may become, fatigue. And I don't think that everybody will just forget about Ukraine in one day. But this tendency will become bigger and bigger with every coming year. So we need to use this very small window of opportunity of time to end this war. Otherwise, it may become endless.
Militarily, diplomatically, or otherwise.
Whatever.
So we fall into a background war that just is part of life.
Yeah.
Oof. Well, let's hope that doesn't happen.
Yeah.
Let's hope we have a
We
resolution.
need to be more optimistic.
Yeah, I'm with you, and I am optimistic. I think that either through the strength and courage of the Ukrainian armed forces and the Ukrainian people, or through international pressure on the Kremlin, one way or the other, we can find a solution to this war. So, thank you for your time today, Mr. Ambassador, for coming on the Edge. It's very much appreciated.
Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.